The city of Jacksonville, Florida, known for its vast size and a population of approximately 971,319 as of 2020, holds the title of the most populous city in the state. Situated on the Atlantic coast, this vibrant city boasts a rich history, a bustling port, and a variety of recreational and historical sites that shape the lives of its residents. With its diverse community, Jacksonville offers a dynamic cultural scene, including numerous parks, museums, and beaches, providing a perfect blend of leisure and opportunities for historical exploration. However, it is important to acknowledge the city's crime rate, which surpasses the national average by 17%, presenting its own set of challenges. Against this backdrop, the Kamaya Mowgli case emerged as a significant event in the city's recent history. On July 10, 1998, a day that was meant to be filled with joy and new beginnings turned into a day of profound sorrow for Shanara Mobley. At the tender age of 16, she welcomed her daughter, Kamaya, into the world at University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida at approximately 6:55 a.m. However, just 8 hours after the birth, tragedy struck. A nurse, who had been providing support and engaging in conversations with Shanara and Kamaya, suddenly became a part of a horrifying nightmare. Despite the nurse's initial assistance and the trust she had built with Shanara, she ultimately played a role in the abduction. In the later part of the afternoon, when Shanara was feeling exhausted and vulnerable, the nurse proposed the idea of placing Kamaya in her baby carrier for a routine temperature check. This suggestion seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary, especially when Kamaya's grandmother entered the room and briefly interacted with the little one before the nurse took her away, assuring a swift return. However, as time passed and 20 minutes turned into an eternity, panic began to consume Shanara. Overwhelmed with a sense of dread, she embarked on a desperate search throughout the hospital corridors, her fear as a mother intensifying into sheer terror. The hospital, upon realizing the unthinkable reality of an abduction, promptly contacted the police, initiating an extensive search operation. Later, surveillance footage revealed a woman, who appeared to be just another family member according to the hospital staff, leaving with Kamaya unnoticed. This woman, dressed in a blue smock adorned with flowered green scrubs and surgical gloves, had successfully departed with Kamaya without arousing any suspicion. Police immediately launched a citywide search, implementing measures such as sealing off the hospital, halting buses, and notifying airports to be on high alert for the missing baby. Every nook and cranny of Jacksonville was meticulously scrutinized, from trains to hospital rooms, while helicopters scoured the area from above. Despite these concerted efforts, Kamaya remained elusive. The suspect, as described by both surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts, was believed to be an African-American woman in her early 30s, potentially wearing a wig with shoulder-length dark brown hair. It was theorized that she may have recently experienced the loss of a child or was feigning pregnancy. The police diligently pursued numerous leads, sought public assistance, and maintained hope, relying on statistics that indicated a favorable chance of recovering abducted infants. Kamaya's family endured endless weeks of uncertainty, desperate for any news about her whereabouts and the mysterious woman who had taken her. Without any pre-abduction photos of Kamaya, authorities had to rely on a composite sketch to help identify her, appealing to the public for any information that could bring her back safely. Despite the detectives' optimism and the usual success rate in similar cases, Kamaya remained missing, leaving everyone involved with haunting questions about her well-being and the motives of the woman who had snatched her away. The investigation into Kamaya Mobley's disappearance took a complicated turn, with suspicion falling on various individuals. Craig Aiken, Kamaya's father, found himself at the center of the storm, despite being in prison when his daughter was born and taken. The intricacies of his relationship with Shanara Mobley, coupled with their significant age difference, and the circumstances surrounding Kamaya's birth added layers of complexity to an already convoluted case. Even though Craig was physically absent, his determination to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance matched Shanara's. As the days passed with no sign of Kamaya, suspicions shifted unpredictably. Shanara, a young mother of 16, faced intense scrutiny from law enforcement, the community, and those closest to her. The unsettling possibility that she might have played a role in her own daughter's vanishing was exacerbated by Craig's legal issues, which seemed to overshadow their situation. The investigation left no stone unturned, exploring every possible angle, including the unsettling theories that Craig had orchestrated the abduction from prison, or that Shanara and Craig had conspired together. The immense pressure on Shin Era resulted in a heart-wrenching moment when she defended her innocence by reflecting on her decision to bring Kamaya into the world despite difficult circumstances. The suspicion even reached Shannara's mother, who was present during the abduction. The guilt and the need to find someone to blame overwhelmed the family, leading to fractures and accusations that only intensified the pain. Throughout the ordeal, both the police and the public closely monitored the family, analyzing their every action and statement. As the investigation expanded, the authorities left no stone unturned, following up on leads, interviewing numerous individuals and circulating flyers with Kamaya's description and information about the suspect. The hospital where Kamaya was taken from offered a substantial reward of $250,000 in the hopes of obtaining information that could lead to her safe return. Despite these efforts, the case went cold, leaving Kamaya's whereabouts a mystery. The emotional toll on Shannara was immeasurable. She lived in a state of suspended grief, holding on to hope by celebrating Kamaya's birthday each year with a cake, symbolizing her enduring love and the desire for a reunion. The legal battle against the hospital for its security lapses ended in a financial settlement, but no amount could make up for the loss Shannara experienced. It took nearly 2 decades before the truth about Kamaya's fate was revealed, finally providing answers to the agonizing questions that tormented Shannara. In 2017, a stunning revelation emerged in Walterboro, South Carolina, unraveling the mystery of Kamaya Mobley's disappearance. An 18-year-old teenager named Alexis Monago faced a life-changing discovery as she prepared to start her journey into adulthood with her first job, encountering a significant obstacle, the lack of necessary identification and a social security number to proceed. Gloria Williams, who was known as Alexis Monago's mother, made a shocking confession that changed everything. She admitted to abducting Alexis from the hospital on the day she was born and raising her as her own child. This revelation caused immense emotional turmoil for Alexis. Despite the overwhelming truth, Alexis found herself torn between conflicting loyalties. She pleaded with Gloria to escape and live in secrecy to avoid the authorities. However, burdened by guilt, Gloria felt compelled to face the consequences of her actions. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving Alexis, the daughter she had raised for 18 years, regardless of their true relationship. Alexis, feeling torn and confused, confided in only one close friend, carrying the weight of this secret alone. Approximately a year and a half later, an anonymous tip to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children exposed the case. This led to Gloria's arrest at her residence in the early morning hours. Amidst the chaos, on January 12, 2017, the police received DNA confirmation that Alexis, now known as Kamaya Mobley, was the missing child who had been kidnapped 18 years ago. This breakthrough not only solved an 18-year-old mystery, but also unraveled a complex web of emotions, identities, and legal consequences. With her true heritage now known, Alexis, or Kamaya, was thrust into the national spotlight, becoming the living connection between a painful past and a hopeful future. Her life story is an extraordinary journey from abduction to discovery, and the intricate process of reuniting with her biological family. Born on July 10, 1998, to Shannara Mobley and Craig Akin, Kamaya Mobley was taken by Gloria Williams and raised as her own daughter, Alexis Monago, in Walterboro, South Carolina. In this tight-knit community, Alexis grew up as a typical young woman, excelling in school, attending church regularly, and sharing a strong bond with Gloria, whom she believed to be her mother. Alexis' upbringing consisted of ordinary activities, like cheering for her older brother at basketball games and pampering herself with Gloria, who provided her with love, care, and a stable home. However, beneath the nurturing environment, the truth about Alexis' true parentage remained a looming shadow, eventually coming to light in a revelation that would alter everything. The emotional journey that followed the discovery of her true identity was further complicated by the legal consequences faced by Gloria Williams. As Alexis grappled with the reality of her situation, authorities worked diligently to reunite her with her biological parents, Shannara and Craig. The process of reunion was filled with a mix of emotions, from Shannara's unimaginable joy and relief at finding her daughter alive to the complexities of building a relationship from scratch. Their initial meeting over FaceTime was a poignant moment characterized by mutual curiosity and an unexpected ease of communication, as if they were not strangers but a family separated only by circumstances. However, despite the initial warmth, challenges lay ahead. Shannara's disappointment upon learning that Alexis had not alerted the authorities upon discovering her abduction highlighted the intricate web of emotions and loyalties at play. Alexis's desire to continue being known as Alexis and her reluctance to see Gloria face severe punishment underscored the depth of their bond and the difficulty of navigating her newfound reality. For Shannara and Craig, the dream of a seamless reunion faced obstacles as they confronted Alexis's loyalty to the only mother she had ever known. Gloria Williams, born in 1965, found herself at a tumultuous point in her life around the time she abducted Kamaya Mobley. In 1998, Gloria, at the age of 33, went through a devastating miscarriage, a painful experience she chose to keep hidden. Despite not being pregnant, she exhibited symptoms of a phantom pregnancy, maintaining the illusion. During this time, her then-boyfriend Charles Manigault put immense pressure on her to have a child, which was intertwined with a history of physical abuse. Gloria believes that this abuse contributed to her miscarriage. The situation at home deteriorated to the point where Gloria's sons from a previous marriage were deemed unsafe and had to live with their father. Charles insisted on having a baby, believing it would stabilize their tumultuous relationship. Filled with a mix of despair and hope for change, Gloria went on autopilot and embarked on a 4-hour drive that led her to the hospital where Shannara Mobley was about to give birth. In Shannara's hospital room, found herself in a vulnerable moment as Shannara expressed her uncertainties about motherhood. These uncertainties resonated with Gloria's deep longing to fulfill Charles's desire for a child. This led Gloria to impersonate a nurse, abduct Kamaya, and create a narrative that would not be questioned by her family or Charles. Upon returning home with Kamaya, Gloria fabricated records and maintained this false reality for 18 years, despite the foundation being built on lies. However, contrary to her hopes, the arrival of Kamaya did not mend the fractures in Gloria's relationship with Charles. The act of abducting Kamaya became a turning point in Gloria's life, not for the reasons she had anticipated, but because it gave her the strength to leave the abusive relationship with Charles. This decision was not driven by the expected stability a child might bring, but by a newfound determination to provide a safer environment for Kamaya. Gloria Williams, after enduring a tumultuous period, managed to rebuild her life. She found solace in marrying a supportive and loving husband, and eventually regained custody of her 2 sons. However, the long-standing mystery surrounding Kamaya Mobley's disappearance was finally resolved when Gloria was arrested on January 13, 2017, from her South Carolina home. The subsequent trial, which garnered national attention, commenced on February 12, 2018. Facing the possibility of life imprisonment, Gloria entered a guilty plea for kidnapping and interference with custody, accepting a plea deal that reduced her sentence to 22 years. Courtroom was a poignant display of emotions, with Shannara Mobley and Craig Akin, Kamaya's biological parents, seated prominently behind the prosecution, representing the years of pain they had endured. Kamaya, known as Alexis Manigault to the world, positioned herself away from both sides, grappling with the complex loyalties that had shaped her life. Throughout the trial, tears and heartbreak were prevalent, underscoring the profound impact of Gloria's actions on all those involved. Kamaya's decision not to testify highlighted the difficult position she found herself in. Despite recognizing Shannara as her birth mother and discovering a family she never knew, her bond with Gloria, the only mother she had known, remained strong. Gloria had provided her with love and a semblance of a normal life, complicating Kamaya's feelings towards her biological parents, who sought justice for the abduction that had torn their family apart. Shannara's testimony served as a poignant reminder of the joy and hope she had experienced upon becoming a mother, only to have it cruelly taken away. Craig, too, expressed the enduring pain of never having known his daughter, directing his anguish towards Gloria in the courtroom. The trial laid bare the deep wounds inflicted on both families, exacerbated by the continued connection between Kamaya and Gloria, which Shannara perceived as a betrayal. Gloria's testimony shed light on her state of mind during the abduction, describing herself as broken and desperate during that period. She detailed the pressures and mistreatment that led to the abduction of Kamaya in an attempt to repair her relationship with her abusive partner. Her apology to Shannara and Craig, while recognizing the pain she had caused, underscored the complexity of her feelings and actions. Ultimately, on June 8, 2018, Williams received an 18-year prison sentence, a ruling that impacted everyone involved. Kamaya's struggle with her identity and loyalty, the Mobley family's pursuit of justice, and Williams' admission of guilt portrayed a narrative of deep sorrow and the pursuit of closure. Following the trial, Kamaya grappled with her dual identity and the reality of her life story. Upon returning to Walterboro, her childhood home, she faced the challenge of reconciling her past with her future. The relationships between Kamaya, Shinera and Williams remained strained, showcasing the enduring effects of Williams' actions across generations. In December 2018, Kamaya Mobley made a life-changing decision to relocate to Jacksonville, Florida, to be closer to her biological family. A move that was met with immense joy and public support, as evidenced by her father's proud announcement on social media. This relocation signified not only a shift in Camilla's living arrangements, but also a significant stride towards healing and establishing a bond with her biological parents. Despite the complexities and emotional turmoil that had characterized their interactions since her discovery and Gloria Williams' trial, Kamaya's adjustment to life in Jacksonville was not without its difficulties. The emotional strain of navigating relationships with both her biological family and the woman she had always known as her mother, Gloria, continued to be a source of tension and heartache. Shinera Mobley, Kamaya's biological mother, expressed feelings of having to compete with Gloria for Kamaya's affection, shedding light on the intricate dynamics at play. Shinera even questioned whether the reunion had caused more harm than good, given the emotional turmoil that it stirred at one point. Despite these challenges, Kamaya's commitment to forging a path forward was evident in her efforts to integrate into her new environment and the life milestones she achieved. By the age of 21, Kamaya had secured employment, obtained a legal government ID, and acquired her driver's license, achievements that marked her growing independence and her desire to move forward with her life. Importantly, when it came time to choose a legal name for her ID, Kamaya chose Kamaya Mobley, embracing her birth identity while navigating the complexities of her dual heritage. Kamaya's relationship with Gloria Williams, though complicated by the circumstances of her upbringing, remained a significant part of her life. She continued to visit Gloria in prison, maintaining a connection with the woman who had raised her. This ongoing relationship underscored Kamaya's struggle to balance her affection for Gloria with her growing connections to her biological family. On December 15, 2023, Williams made a significant move in her case by requesting a judge to dismiss her current judgment and sentence, marking her third plea for reconsideration. She claimed her defense was severely lacking, particularly highlighting that her legal team failed to explore her mental health issues, neglected to request a competency hearing, and did not prepare an adequate defense, leaving her with no choice but to accept a plea deal. As a result, Williams criticized her attorneys for not seeking a change of venue to ensure a fair trial. Her motion advocates for the right to retract her plea, undergo a new competency evaluation, and, if deemed competent, to restart the legal process. For many years, Hastings on the Sussex coast in the south of England has been seen as a great place for a nice getaway or somewhere to move to for a new start. It's close to the sea with plenty of fascinating history to enjoy. There are gorgeous parks and lovely local shops. This is where our story begins. One Saturday afternoon in February 1997, on Lower Park Road lived the Jenkins family. Father Sean, Mother Lois, and their children, Charlotte, Annie, Maya, Esther, and Billy Joe, who was their foster daughter. On the 15th of February 1997, it was the end of the February half-term, when children enjoy a week off school. It was an unusually hot day and many were out in Alexandra Park enjoying the sunshine. Alexandra Park is located directly opposite Lower Park Road, and it is often busy with families, dog walkers, and joggers. That day, Billy Joe was in the garden painting the back patio doors. Annie was at home too, along with Sean. Lois had taken Maya and Esther for a walk with their dog, and Charlotte was at a clarinet lesson. Lois had taken the youngest girls for a walk after having an argument with Billy Joe over a pair of trainers she told Billy Joe she couldn't have. Billy Joe's best friend Holly had offered to go round and help her paint the doors, but Sean told her she couldn't, as Billy Joe was due to be seeing her biological father that weekend, so it wouldn't be possible for her to go over. Billy Joe and Holly spent loads of time with each other and went to Helenswood School together too. They loved hanging out and listening to their favorite E17 songs. The day continued to pass by, and it was soon time for Sean to go and collect Charlotte and one of Charlotte's friends from their music lesson. He set off with Annie, and Billy Joe stayed behind on her own in the garden to carry on painting and listening to music. After dropping Charlotte's friend off, they headed back to Lower Park Road, and Charlotte ran inside and upstairs to put her clarinet away. When she came back down, Sean said they needed to go out again to get some white spirit to remove some paint splashes that Billy Joe had made. They set off in his car to a DIY store, but before they made it there, Sean realized he didn't have any money with him, so they headed home. After getting back to the house at 3:30 p.m., Charlotte had gone inside, and at the back of the property, she came across a traumatizing scene. 13-year-old Billy Joe was lying on the patio with the left side of her face to the ground, and blood all around her. She was still holding the paintbrush. She screamed and called for her dad, who came running and then ushered his daughters into the playroom away from her body. He called his neighbor and family friend, Denise Lancaster, asking for her help. Denise immediately went over. She said Billy Joe's skull was shattered and that she was so badly injured she didn't even want to touch her, telling Sean to ring for an ambulance. She described Billy Joe's head as being on a bin liner, and part of the bin liner was deep inside her left nostril. Emergency services quickly descended on the scene, and the quiet residential street was soon full of police and paramedics. A police surgeon who attended the scene said it was one of the worst cases he had ever seen in his career. "I have 26 years of experience of being a police surgeon, and this is without doubt the saddest and most brutal murder I have ever attended," he said. While chaos was unfolding on Lower Park Road, Lois was completely none the wiser. The weather was beautiful, and so, wondering if the rest of the family wanted to come out and enjoy the sun, she phoned home. Sean picked up the phone and said, "Billy's had an accident." She raced back home where she was met by a police officer who had tears in his eyes. He led Lois back into the house. Billy Joe had been bludgeoned to death with an 18-inch iron tent peg that had come from the shed located at the bottom of the garden. The tent peg had been put on the bunker of the patio earlier that day by one of the other children. She had not been the victim of a sexual assault, and there was no evidence to suggest a break-in. Who on earth would murder a 13-year-old girl in the back garden of her own home in the middle of the day when people were out and about? As the investigation got underway and lines of inquiry were being followed, Sean provided the police with some disturbing information. He said that roughly 2 weeks before Billy Joe's death, he had found a man in their back garden, and 2 weeks prior to that he had also seen a man staring at the house from across the street in Alexandra Park. The family had found the side gate open several times and had become so concerned by this man that security lighting was installed at the property and locks were added to the windows. The previous year, locals had become so concerned with safety in the park after reports of men exposing themselves and drug deals taking place that 1,000 people signed a petition arguing for security in the park to be increased. The house next door to the Jenkins family was abandoned and had been boarded up to protect it from vandalism, which was also becoming a big problem in the area alongside robberies. And police said they were looking at a new theory. Had Billy Joe's killer been hiding in the house next door and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Billy Joe had even said that she was worried she had been followed by someone since December, telling her friends that a white man in a leather jacket in his 40s or 50s had been following her. This description matched the man that Sean said had been watching the house from Alexandra Park. This was not the only time this had happened. 2 years before, Billy Joe had said she was worried she was being stalked by someone, and both her school and the police were made aware of the situation. She had received several cold calls from someone who told her she was being watched. Lois was aware of the phone calls but believed that the person on the other end had not spoken. Detective Superintendent Jeremy Payne said she had told her parents and friends she felt she was being followed and had spotted a man on some occasions. It appears that she felt this man was paying particular attention to her for some reason. By late 1996, Sean and Lois were considering moving home. This must have been incredibly difficult for Billy Joe. She had already been through a lot in her short life. Billy Joe Margaret Jenkins was born on March 29, 1983 in East London to parents Deborah and Bill Jenkins. At the age of 9, Billy Joe was placed in foster care as her mother had not been able to cope and her father had gone to prison. Her mother said she had placed her children in foster care due to her husband's violence. It was in a newspaper advert in 1992 that Sean and Lois Jenkins, who coincidentally shared the same surname, answered the call for foster parents. Newham Social Services visited and placed a 9-year-old girl with them, Billy Joe Jenkins, and her 13-year-old brother, Daryl. Daryl left the foster family a few months later, but Billy Joe stayed. Sean worked in education and Lois was a social worker, so it seemed to be a great fit for Billy Joe. In 1993, they moved to Hastings from London after Sean got a job at William Parker School for Boys, and they settled into a house on Lower Park Road. The stability and security seemed to be perfect for Billy Joe. Lois and Sean had met at a charity event in London in 1982 while he was working as a supply teacher, and they married in Dorset in December the same year. 2 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, and then had 3 more in 1986, 1988, and 1989. After being with the family for several years, Sean and Lois eventually became her legal guardians. It wasn't always easy for Billy Joe or her foster family. Foster care can be an unsettling and traumatic experience for many children, and these complexities often require deep empathy, patience, and understanding on behalf of those who care for them. But Billie Joe was still a bright and lively young girl who worked hard and was well-liked amongst her peers. As one of her neighbors later said, Billie Joe was a young lady in the old-fashioned sense of the word. It was rare to meet a young girl with such manners. It was a life that was so full of promise and hope. A life that had been cruelly and violently snatched away in a shocking act of brutality. A post-mortem was carried out, and it was discovered that in the ferocity of the attack, her skull had been split. She had been attacked from behind and hit at least 5 times. Whoever had done this was clearly a dangerous offender, and the police needed to bring them to justice. One person the police were looking at was a local man known only as Mr. B. He was described as a white man, 5'10" with fair hair and some sort of scar or birthmark on his face. He was seen carrying a baguette and a plastic bag from the shop Safeway. While the investigation continued, the police knew they needed more. So on the 18th of February, the police asked Sean to appeal to the public for any information relating to the case. Lois appeared with him and struggled to contain her devastation. Sean read the following prepared statement. As a family, we are totally devastated. We do not understand why or what the motive was, but we are working closely with the police in the hope that the killer will be found, and that we can eventually piece our lives back together over the coming years. As parents, our sadness drives us to work closely with the police to find her killer. We therefore appeal to anyone who thinks they have any information about this crime to contact the police. He also spoke about the alleged prowlers in the area. As a family, we have felt uneasy about prowlers. On one occasion, I was looking out of the back window and I thought I saw movement. I switched on the security light and got a fleeting glimpse of somebody moving about. Another time, I saw somebody in the park staring at the house. Sean and Lois's daughter Charlotte also told the police that when they had left to go to the DIY shop, the back gate was closed. When they returned, she said it was open. 9 days later, an arrest was made and a man was taken into custody, and he had even tried to strangle the arresting officer. It was Mr. B. On the day of Billie Joe's murder, Mr. B had what was referred to as a rather confused conversation with someone who owned a nearby guest house. He had rung the bell and asked for accommodation, and the owner said it was clear that this man had mental health issues and suggested he would be able to find accommodation in the town center. The route that he pointed him in would have meant he walked past the Jenkins home. His behavior in custody also caused great concern. At one point, he was found in a fetal position with part of a plastic bag shoved into one of his nostrils, as he believed he had to block the body openings to stop germs from getting in. When Billie Joe was found, part of a plastic bin bag had been lodged in one of her nostrils. More plastic was also found in his underwear. However, he was soon released from custody and into secure psychiatric care, and was ruled out as several witnesses had placed him at least 15 minutes away from the house on Lower Park Road. There was also no forensic evidence to link him to the crime. Another man was arrested a few days later, but he too was ruled out and released. Soon there would be a development that would leave people stunned. Sean Jenkins was arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his foster daughter. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with it, but 3 weeks later he was charged with murder and dishonestly obtaining a pecuniary advantage. After looking into his background, it was revealed that he had not been truthful about his teaching experience or his qualifications in order to secure a job as deputy headmaster at William Parker School. He had said that he had attended the prestigious private Gordonstown School and that he had 10 O-levels at grade A, when in actual fact he had CS and below. He said he had gone to the University of Kent and graduated with a 2.1 in English and then got his postgraduate teaching qualification in English with drama. This was also not true. He had just studied to become a teacher with PE as his subject. He said he had gained a master's in education management from the University of London. He actually did have that degree, but it was from the University of East London. To the police, this was evidence that Sean Jenkins was an accomplished liar. As they continued to look into him, there would be yet another twist. 3 weeks after the murder of Billie Joe, a woman walked into Hastings Police Station and told them her story. Lois Jenkins. On the face of it, this appeared to be a very happy family, but talking to Lois and the children painted a very different picture of Sean. When looking at what had happened that day in the lead up to the murder, tension between Annie and Billie Joe was examined. The police notes read, Lois believes that Sean loved them both, but has a theory that if Sean lost it on Saturday, it would have been around this. Billie smugly painting something Annie desperately wanted to do. Winding Annie up, confirmed by Annie. Annie hangdog and depressed, washing the Opel car. Sean suddenly thinking, what am I doing? Why am I allowing this to happen? a gesture from Billy to Annie to rub it in further as she was prone to do. It was enough to make Sean snap. It wasn't just his CV that came under scrutiny. Prior to the murder, Sean had decided he wanted to venture into politics and join the Conservative Party, despite his left-wing views. And it was during this time that Lois said he began to lie, which caused arguments between the two of them. She said he wrote a small manifesto about himself, which I knew to be inaccurate. He said he was a regular theatergoer, yet we hadn't been to a theater performance for 6 years. We argued endlessly about his strange behavior. It wasn't just arguments that were causing a problem, but violence too, according to Lois. She said, "I think he felt insecure. I never thought his behavior was normal, but I got used to it. I ended up feeling very sorry for him, as I felt he was a victim of emotions that he couldn't control." She also was worried about the discipline he was using on the children. There was a book that was popular at the church they attended called Dare to Discipline, and after attending a series of talks by James Dobson, the author of said book, Sean had started to use a stick in corporal punishment at home. Lois said Sean would use a stick or a slipper. If I challenged Sean's discipline, he would lose his temper, and sometimes he threatened me. She said that the violence had started before they were even married, with the first instance being 3 weeks before their wedding day. "He lost his temper and slapped me around my face," she told police. "A few weeks after the marriage, he had a violent outburst and slapped me again. I was surprised at how volatile he was and felt frightened. When he lost his temper, he never shouted. He would just lose it, snap, and in a few moments he would be back to normal." She said his violence continued to escalate. "When we lived in East Ham, Sean hit me one night and pulled my hair, which was long then. It was the first time I was really frightened of him. I told him I was not going to put up with it anymore. For the first time, he admitted he had a temper. Previously, he had always blanked it out and refused to admit that he had hit me." She didn't tell social services any of this when they came to place Billy Joe with them. Billy Joe was now gone, and the spotlight was firmly on Sean Jenkins. Sean told police that after returning home he had gone into the dining room to turn the music down and said that there was no reaction from Billy Joe. He described the moment he found her. "I felt her neck. I moved the hair off the side of her face. I then became aware that her forehead appeared to be different, misshapen. I also saw that her eye was swollen, as if someone had punched her. I then noticed a bubble from her nose and I believed that she was alive at that moment. I also noticed that I had blood on my hands. I felt sick." On the day of the murder, Sean had been wearing a blue fleece, trousers, and shoes. When his clothes were examined, they were found to have more than 100 tiny blood spots on them. The exact amount does differ depending on the source, and it was argued that these had come from him attacking her, also known as impact spatter. The case that was presented was that after returning from picking Charlotte up, he had bludgeoned Billy Joe in a fit of rage and then hurried out of the house to the DIY store to give himself an alibi, being sure to drive an extra long, unnecessarily long route. The time frame of him getting home and then leaving again was about 3 minutes. Sean said that this version of events was not true and he was not responsible for her death. There were several aspects of Sean's behavior which had struck the investigators as strange. They had gone to go and buy white spirit, but there later turned out to already be some in the house. Also, after finding Billy Joe, Sean left his children with the neighbor and went and sat in his car. He later said that he realized as he was sat there that it was a stupid thing to do, so proceeded to get out. With the forensics of the blood spots and the belief that they could only have got onto his clothes from the impact of the attack, the police formally charged him with murder on the 14th of March. Tuesday, April 22, 1997, Billy Joe's funeral service was held at a chapel in East London. A horse-drawn carriage transported her coffin and behind it walked nearly 300 people, holding onto each other for support and comfort. Many people had traveled from Hastings to be there. Just before the service was due to start, Lois arrived with her 4 daughters, and Billy Joe's mother Deborah froze. She had specifically asked her to stay away from the service. Deborah then ran out of the service in tears, followed by her partner. They drove away and missed both the service and the burial. Sean was on bail at the time but did not go to the funeral. June 1998. It was now time for Sean Jenkins to go on trial, and the media interest in the trial would be huge. During his trial, it was put forward by the prosecution that Sean had murdered Billy Joe after frustrating and irritating events during the day, but they added that the real motive behind the killing might never come to light. The prosecution argued that there was a small time frame when he was alone in the house with Billy Joe as his daughters waited for him outside. They said that it was in this time frame that he flew into a rage, attacking her with a tent peg, before going back out to the front of the house and setting off to the DIY store. His daughter told the court that the route he had driven was weird. He had left Lower Park Road and turned onto Bethune Way, then onto St. Helens Road and finally Door Direct Way, and back onto Lower Park Road, looping the park twice, before finally going in the direction of the DIY shop. At the traffic lights by the Sainsbury's on Saddlescombe Road North, he realized he hadn't brought any money with him, so they turned around and drove back empty-handed. This journey totaled around 15 minutes. It was argued he had taken this route and decided to go to the shop to provide himself with an alibi. The case relied heavily upon the blood spots and the belief that they had come from the murder, but the defense hit back at this and said that they had got onto his clothes when he found her and moved her. They said air was released from her lungs as she was moved, thus spraying him with tiny fine blood spots. The defense also presented an experiment to the court to show that this could have been how the blood spots got onto his clothes. Dr. Ian Hill, a pathologist, was called by the prosecution to offer his opinion on said experiment. He called the experiment quite unrealistic, because the amount of air they used was more than an adult breathing would use, and he added that there was only a blockage in her lower airway. It was later revealed that the blockage had actually been in her upper airway. The blood spots were also looked at under an electron microscope by Dr. Jeremy Skepper of Cambridge University. He said that the blood spots contained white particles that could have been damaged skin tissue from her head. The claims that they had got there from Billie Joe's breathing were labeled as impossible by an expert witness. Professor David Salford from Keele University said that he had no doubt that he regarded it as impossible, given the level and nature of the injuries she had. He said that it was highly unlikely that Billie Joe could have inhaled the 2.2 liters of air necessary for her to exhale forcefully enough for the blood to spatter. I still doubt whether she would have been able to inhale 2.2 liters with a gasp, but I accept that at the very worst she might have been able to. It is very unlikely, but I can't say it couldn't possibly happen. I am talking way out on the extremes of what could happen in extreme situations, he said. He said that gasping like that would have been extremely visible, and that he had seen nothing in Sean's statement that mentioned her gasping. Another forensic expert seconded this opinion. The nature and the distribution of the blood stains on Mr. Jenkins' clothing was entirely consistent with the results of the wearer of the clothing having delivered several blows onto wet blood, and the clothing having intercepted an impact mist of the blood as a result. It was noted that neither Denise, who had gone to Billie Joe after Sean had called for her help, nor the paramedics had similar blood spots on them. The home office pathologist, Dr. Ian Hill, had been the person to carry out the postmortem on Billie Joe. He said that the bruises and cuts to her hands and arms were consistent with her trying to defend herself from the onslaught. Billie Joe's biological mother left the courtroom in tears after a video of the police examining her daughter's body was played. Billie Joe's biological father also left the public gallery. Jury members were also left very upset, and those sat in the public gallery gasped at the video. Sean was given special permission to leave the dock while it played. The video showed Billie Joe as she lay on her back, blood soaked into her white shirt and her awful head injury visible. It was now time for Sean to give evidence. He said that he had panicked when he found her body and explained that he went to call for an ambulance. But as he did, the phone had started to ring. He said he picked up the phone and slammed it down to stop it. "I didn't want to speak to anyone. I just panicked," he said. When asked how he helped Billie Joe, he told the court, "I went down to her and whispered to her gently, and I don't know what I did next." He was asked by the prosecutor why he chose to use that phone and not the one close to her body. He replied, "The girls were screaming and screeching and crying and I wanted to be near them. I wasn't sure whether there was somebody else in the house and I didn't want to leave the girls. I didn't make a rational decision." Why, when the emergency services had asked him to, did he not put her in the recovery position? "I'm not even sure I knew what the recovery position was. When I saw Billie, I was stunned and I didn't know what to do and I panicked," the prosecutor responded. When looking at his behavior after the murder, the prosecution said that him being slow to call for the ambulance and the claims that he went to his car to put the soft top up over worries about its security were indications of guilt. But a neurologist said that these could have been the response to being in shock. The topic of whether or not to use the children as witnesses became a big issue. Lois told the police that their children had since changed their stories, which had previously backed up Sean's version of events and suggested that he would not have had the time to kill Billie Joe before leaving to go to the DIY store. She said that they had now turned against him and could no longer be called as witnesses. There was also a statement from Annie which was not put before the court. It alleged that her father had once punched her in the stomach with such force she had needed to lie down. The police had asked her about the physical punishments meted out by her father and she replied, But doesn't every family have a naughty stick? The jury also did not hear Lois' testimony as she did not appear for either the prosecution or the defense. The trial would last for 19 days and 15 witnesses would be called, including psychiatrists and forensic experts. The jury would deliberate for 2 days, and on the second day the judge told them he would accept a majority verdict of 10-2. They then came back with a unanimous one. Sean Jenkins was convicted of the murder of Billy Joe and sentenced to life in prison. The guilty verdict prompted shouts of yes from the public gallery. Mr. Justice Gage told him that he had been convicted on the back of what he called compelling evidence. By any standards, this is a horrendous crime. The fact you committed this crime, the circumstances in which it was committed and the way in which it was committed, lead me to conclude that you are a very considerable danger to the community. There is only one sentence. You will be sentenced to the equivalent of life. Lois Jenkins filed for divorce and took their children and moved to Australia, where she would later remarry and have a son. She said in a statement, 16 months ago I returned with 2 of my children from a quiet Saturday afternoon walk on the beach to a tragedy more horrific than any person ever expects to encounter in a lifetime. It is a terrible thing to realize that the man with whom you have lived for 14 years, the father of your children, is capable of murdering your child. There is no reason, no explanation for such a pointless waste of a young life. Now that the trial is over, the girls and I need peace and quiet to come to terms with what has happened. In 1999, Sean lodged an appeal against his conviction. He argued that the forensic evidence that had been presented was inaccurate. He lost this appeal on December 21st. But that is not the end of the story. In 2002, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which investigates suspected miscarriages of justice, commissioned Kent Police to re-interview Annie and Charlotte in Tasmania. They had both suggested they could not recall making the comments their mother had attributed to them. On the 12th of May 2003, the Criminal Cases Review Commission had been looking into the case now for 2 years, and it was subsequently moved back to the Court of Appeal. The Criminal Cases Review Commission said that the jury had not heard evidence from Sean's daughters, who had corroborated what he had said. His appeal began on the 30th of June 2004. After flying in from Tasmania, where she now lived with her mother and siblings, Charlotte gave evidence at the appeal. Sean's lawyers argued that if Charlotte and Annie had been allowed to testify during the first trial, they could have corroborated his story. They also said that Lois had lied to the police when she said that they had changed their stories against him. During Charlotte's evidence, she said that she had been worried about incriminating her father and that he might not ever like her again if she did so. She told the court that it was a possibility that she had said to Lois that she knew Sean was responsible for Billy Joe's murder. She didn't contradict what her mother had said, but admitted that her memories were hazy. When talking about the day of Billy Joe's murder, she said that she had remembered having her clarinet lesson and being picked up by Sean before he drove both her and Annie home. While Charlotte was not asked about how long they spent at the house, the defense asked her to talk about what she could remember. She said she remembered going quickly up to her bedroom to put her clarinet away, and that they soon left to go to the DIY shop. What follows is a transcript of the questions and answers between Charlotte and Sean's defense lawyer, Claire Montgomery QC, who asked who was the first to enter the house. I think it was me. Where did you go? Into the dining room. We know you saw Billy Joe. Charlotte then began to cry and nod. She asked for a break and left the courtroom, and after having a breather she came back to continue her evidence. The lawyer asked her about conversations Lois said she had had with her daughter that dissuaded the defense team from the first trial from calling the children as witnesses. She asked if Charlotte had told Lois that she was worried about incriminating Sean. Did Charlotte tell Lois that she just knew Sean had murdered Billy Joe? Charlotte responded, I may have, because I was confused and kept changing my mind. I can't remember. I was confused remembering the day, wondering whether or not to believe what was in the papers, things like that. Had you believed your father was guilty? I can't remember. What made you think he was guilty? What was being said to you? I can't remember thinking it, so I don't understand why you're asking. She also denied that Lois had coached her and turned her against her father. She added that at no time had he coached her on what to say or asked her about her story. The prosecutor had planned for a lengthy cross-examination, but after hearing Charlotte's evidence, chose not to ask any questions. Annie had declined to come back to the UK from Tasmania, saying it would disrupt her studies and she had only just started to settle there. She did give a video interview and extracts of the interview were read to the court. She said that she didn't remember some of the conversations Lois had spoken to the police about. She spoke about occasions where Sean allegedly exhibited violence towards them, saying he had punched her in the stomach and also kicked Billy Joe. She said she couldn't remember an alleged incident in which he reportedly dragged their sister Maya up 2 flights of stairs by her ears. Lois did testify against Sean during his appeal, and described him as going into violent rages, with one such incident leaving her with a perforated eardrum. 2 years after they had moved to the coast, Lois said an attack from Sean had left her needing hospital treatment. He hit me around the face hard and my head was spinning with the force of it. I went upstairs and hid in the loft, crying. Later I went downstairs and it was as if Sean had forgotten. Sean's lawyer said that Lois had become sure that he was responsible for Billy Joe's murder, and worried that Charlotte and Annie's original statements could provide him with an alibi, as they would have shown he would not have had enough time to kill Billy Joe before going to the DIY store. The defense also suggested that Lois had lied to the police by saying that the girls' accounts had drastically changed and they could no longer be called to give evidence, adding that she was worried that the statements from their daughters could prove his innocence, meaning he could have returned home. The defense said that the girls' accounts had not changed at all, and had they been allowed to testify at the first trial, he might not have been convicted. During the appeal, Charlotte didn't suggest that what her mother had attributed to her was incorrect. The appeal judges believed Lois's account and dismissed the idea that the defense had been misled. The appeal also looked at new scientific evidence that suggested that the blood could have got onto his clothes as he bent down to check her breathing or hold her. The defense turned to Professor David Dennison, who was a leading expert in lung disease. He found what he said was evidence of PIE, or pulmonary interstitial emphysema, a rare condition. He said that there had been a buildup of pressure in her lungs in the minutes leading up to the murder. He believed that the cause of this was blood blocking her airway, and some of this was released when Sean moved her, thus the blood spots spraying onto him. My experiments show that you can generate from the mouth and nose the sort of spatters that were found on Sean Jenkins' clothing, and the distribution is almost identical. The size of the droplets is almost identical. So it is a very, very credible explanation, Professor Dennison said. On the back of this evidence, on the 16th of June, 3 Court of Appeal judges quashed Sean Jenkins' original conviction, deemed it unsafe, and ordered a retrial. He was released on bail with the conditions that he live with his father in Wales and not leave a 10-mile zone unless it was to visit his lawyers or go to court. While he waited to go on trial again in February 2005, Sean remarried. A woman called Christina had written him a letter of support in July 2004, and a relationship later formed. In April 2005, the retrial began at the Old Bailey. Prosecutor Nicholas Hilliard said that the prosecution didn't believe the account Sean had given about finding Billy Joe. Sean had allegedly said to the police that when he found her with lots of blood around her head, he knew what happened wasn't an accident. He said he felt uneasy to let them, his 2 daughters, out of my sight, and went into the hall to call an ambulance. The prosecutor said, "We do not accept he was giving a truthful account. He was trying to avoid doing anything to help her." The prosecution also said that the night before, Lois and Sean had gotten into an argument about Billy Joe, a child that Sean would describe to the police as difficult. Lois appeared at the retrial via a video link. She cried as she said that one of their daughters had said that Sean kept going over her story with her as she was trying to read a book. She cried and said, "I feel I'm breaching the confidence of my children." She added that all the girls had moments when they opened up and spoke about the whole story before closing up again. She explained that following the press conference, she began to suspect him. A statement that she had made in July 2003 to the police was read out, and it said the following: 3 or 4 days following the murder, and in the middle of the night, it began to dawn on me that Sean was, quite possibly, responsible for the murder. I think these thoughts may have resulted from the way Sean handled the press conference during the day. I cannot remember the press conference. Following this, I have become completely paranoid about my thoughts and the implications on the girls and I. Lois said that Sean had applied for the role of head teacher, and whilst he had been told he had secured the post, he was still waiting for written confirmation as they were checking his references. Knowing that he had lied on his CV and exaggerated his qualifications and lied about where he had got them from was making him incredibly anxious. The night before the murder, she said that Sean was pacing up and down in the lounge really fast and said that he appeared to be on edge. One of the people to testify at the retrial was Denise Lancaster, the friend that Sean had called to help Billy Joe. She said, "I could see Billy lying down on the floor with her head to one side, and her hand was up near her face. The rest of her body was flat to the ground. Her legs were together in a very strange position, I felt. She looked as if she was asleep. I bent down and touched her hand and touched her cheek. I had an overwhelming sense of it not being something I could do, to put her in a recovery position, which had been my general idea. She seemed too injured for me to really touch. After telling Sean to ring for an ambulance and getting a towel for Billy Joe's wounds, she returned to the patio. I looked more closely and saw her head was completely shattered. It was devastating. The only thing moving was the blood flowing from her nose. It was a slow trickle. The right side of her face was remarkably undamaged. Denise told the court that Sean had been wearing the blue fleece that day, and that he had later left it at her house when the family had gone over. I picked up the fleece and Lois said to Sean, "Your coat." He said he didn't want it, and she said, "It's freezing out there. Take your coat." Denise then said she had been with Lois when the police told her about the blood spots on his clothes. She said to me, "Why did Sean kill Billy? If he was ever going to kill anyone, I am sure he would kill me." One issue that needed to be addressed was motive. During his cross-examination, it was put forward that he had killed her after she had failed to turn the music down. "You attacked her in a terrible temper in a matter of seconds," the prosecutor said. "No, I didn't attack Billy. I didn't pick up the tent peg. There was no argument whatsoever. When you left Billy, she was almost dead, wasn't she?" "No, Billy was not dead. Billy was alive and Billy was well." The court heard that Sean had what was called a peculiar look on his face as he rushed down the steps of the house and told Charlotte and Annie to get into the car. As part of the proceedings, the jury visited the house on Lower Park Road and then did the route that Sean drove that day to the DIY shop, the route that looped around the park, the route that seemed needlessly long. Throughout the retrial, the forensic evidence that had been presented during Sean's first trial was heavily scrutinized. Experts in forensics told the court that it was possible for the blood spots to get onto his clothes, as he held her while she lay dying. A key witness at the retrial, Robert Schroeder, an emeritus professor at Imperial College London, would talk about the traces of other things in the blood spatter, like metal and bone. He said, "Whatever blood came out of Billy Joe's mouth would have been contaminated. So to find microscopic traces of paint or bone or metal does not change anything. The paint and metal could have come in blood running down her head into her mouth. The truth is that the scientific evidence is minimal, and the idea that Mr. Jenkins could have done what was alleged in the time he had and then gone straight out with his daughters in the car is hard to believe." The retrial would last for 3 months, and it was soon time for the jury to deliberate. Media interest was at a fever pitch. Then came the breaking news. They had failed to reach a verdict. They were discharged and a second retrial was ordered. Before the second retrial, Dr. Skepper, who had examined the blood spots during the first trial, said that fragments of metal, paint and bone could also be present in the blood spots, but the judge ruled it inadmissible as it was submitted too late. A senior prosecution source said, "This evidence about the bone in the blood was completely new, and we are extremely disappointed that it did not go before the jury." When preparing for the second retrial, something new and very interesting would come out. Sean Jenkins had said that he had seen a man dressed smartly in the hallway of the family home when the ambulance arrived. It was someone he assumed was a police officer. He said, "I have stood face to face with him, I have spoken with him, I know what he looks like and I remember his mannerisms. He wore a dark navy or possibly dark olive overcoat and was smartly dressed. I could see he was wearing a tie. He had highly polished shoes. It was this fact that reassured me he was a police officer." The man was standing in the hall. I turned around and looked at him. He said, "She's going to be okay," then left me staring at the door to the dining room. I honestly believe this man is responsible for my daughter's murder. I believe he killed her in cold blood for reasons that I can only speculate and surmise. He said that he believed this man had been hiding in the dining room before coming out into the hallway. Denise Lancaster, who went round after Sean called for her help, said that she thought this mystery man was a fiction. When asked in an interview why this hadn't been mentioned before, he said, "I did mention him in my original witness statement. For years, the police didn't challenge this idea that this man was a police officer. And for years, Sean said he believed this to be true." In 2005, when preparing for his second trial, Sean asked the CPS for the statements of all of the officers who had been to the house that day. There was only one that could not be accounted for: the man from the hallway. In spite of this new development, the second retrial of Sean Jenkins began on the 31st of October 2005. The prosecution laid out their case again. They said that the person who had murdered Billy Joe Jenkins was not the mystery man in the hallway. They said it was Sean. It does not take a moment to hit someone with an iron bar and not many more to hit them several forceful blows. If she did not die instantly, she could not have lived more than a few minutes. "It's a mercy she was unconscious," the prosecution said. He added that Sean's story had been inconsistent as to whether or not he had actually gone into the house before going to the DIY store or not. During these proceedings, Sean admitted to being physical with Billy Joe, slapping her in the face on one occasion. He said, "I heard a noise upstairs, so I went up and Billy was pulling heads off dolls." His daughter Esther was upset and asked her to stop, and Billy Joe swore at her and pulled her hair. "I prized one of Billy's hands off Esther's hair and then slapped her face," adding that it wasn't hard, but he did regret it. He described the second occasion as being when Lois was talking to Billy Joe and Billy Joe refused to look at her. He said, "I turned Billy's face gently towards Lois and said, 'Look at your mother.'" He denied that he had kicked Billy Joe's sprained ankle during a holiday in France in the year before her murder, but a family friend, Peter Gamster, told the court that Sean definitely did. He said that he had been annoyed that she had hurt herself, allegedly saying to her, "You are always hurting yourself when I go away every time there is something wrong." Peter added, "There is no such thing as a playful kick. It was a proper, aggressive kick." He was furious. He was angry. Videos of interviews of Billy Joe's friends taken shortly after her murder were played to the court, where they said that Billy Joe had told them that Sean had been violent towards her. One of her friends, Laura, said that Billy Joe had come into school with blood on her face, saying she got punched in her nose by her dad. There was blood on her shirt and blood around her mouth. She said on a separate occasion that Billy Joe had bruises on her arms and legs and reportedly said, "You can guess what happened." Her friend Holly spoke of another occasion in which Billy Joe had told Sean to leave their dog Buster alone. She said he pinned her up against the door and scratched her face. She said Sean just lost his temper. Her friends said that Billy Joe had been worried that if she made a complaint, her foster parents would lose their jobs. The shocking allegations did not stop there. It was stated that Lois had told police back then that one of their daughters felt Sean preferred Billy Joe to her and that Billy Joe, quote, flirted with him. Lois would later say, "I don't recall her saying it in that situation, but there was a whole guilty thing and that was a part of it. But I don't recall her telling me that specifically." The prosecution characterized Sean Jenkins as a bully, someone who lied repeatedly and murdered Billy Joe in a fit of rage. The defense hit back and said that Sean was a caring man, who was the victim of poor forensic evidence and very bad luck. After deliberating for 39 hours over 8 days, the jury, once again, failed to reach a verdict. The prosecution agreed that it would not call for a third retrial, and the judge recorded the verdict as not guilty on the February 9, 2006. Sean Jenkins was formally acquitted of murder. Lois' testimony about domestic abuse was only revealed after his acquittal and a court order was lifted. This testimony was not presented to any of the 3 juries, from his first trial and his 2 retrials, in spite of changes being made to the law in 2003 to allow the admission of evidence of a defendant's character to be presented. Lois had also made a claim that Sean had had a sexual relationship with a teenage girl who allegedly bore a striking resemblance to Billy Joe. This was ruled as inadmissible. Even though Billy Joe's biological father Bill was battling throat cancer, he had attended all the proceedings, and after Sean was formally acquitted he spoke on radio and said that the allegations of domestic abuse against Sean should have been heard. He said, "I do feel regrets. I should have been a better father. Obviously, I'm not proud of the things I've done in my past. I feel if I'd been a better father then perhaps Billy Joe may still be alive today. But I'm not holding myself to what happened to my daughter. There's only one person I hold responsible." Sadly, Bill would pass away a few months later. Sean Jenkins was now a free man. As he sat outside court following his acquittal, 2 women came up to him and began punching him and kicking him, later revealed to be Billy Joe's aunts. One of them said they would launch a civil case against Sean, as the judge had refused to allow the scientific evidence that the blood spots on his clothes contained fragments of Billy Joe's bone. She said, "We will see him again in court. This is not the end." Outside the Old Bailey stood Sean Jenkins. Billy Joe's murderer has escaped detection because of the dreadful errors in the police investigation and their single-minded and desperate determination to convict me at all costs. The police who have been in charge of the inquiry have been willfully blind and incompetent. The investigation was enormous, with many lines of inquiry and 700 statements being taken by the police. Across the 3 trials of Sean Jenkins, the jury spent 36 days deliberating, and it was now all over. Assistant Chief Constable Jeff Williams said Sussex Police would now take time to reflect on today's outcome. Throughout this long and detailed investigation, we have resolutely pursued our aim, which is to seek justice for Billy Joe. The role of the police is to investigate crime, and that is what Sussex Police have done. This remains an unsolved murder case. It will, as a matter of course, be subject to review, which we will conduct with an open mind. She was brutally murdered on the patio of her foster parents' home. a place where she ought to have been safe. Following his acquittal, Sean was interviewed by journalist Trevor McDonald as part of a special report called Billy Joe and Me. The interview covered a wide range of topics, including why had he lied on his CV and exaggerated his qualifications. He said it was simply because he'd wanted a better job and had been struggling to pay the mortgage, so wanted a job with a better salary. He explained the reasons why he had driven that particular route to the DIY shop was because it was not safe for him to turn around in the street. And shortly after setting off, he decided to go back home. But when one of his daughters expressed disappointment at not being able to paint, he drove off again to the DIY shop. He talked about the allegations that had been made by Lois. He denied being abusive and emphatically stated he had never beaten his wife. He said that Lois was vulnerable, didn't know what she was doing, and was persuaded by the police that he had killed Billy Joe. He also denied being violent with his children. Following the interview, two of his daughters said in a statement, "The comments made by our father, where he denied using corporal punishment against us, are not true." Following his experiences, Sean pursued a master's in criminology and criminal justice, and a master's in social research and methodology. He said, "I'm in my final year of my doctorate and I'm enjoying understanding more and more about my case and what happened to me. I want to be able to use what I have learned to help other people who go through the miscarriage of justice experience." He also published a book called The Murder of Billy Joe, in which he talks about the case and his life. In the book, he spoke about this mystery man that he said he saw in the house and mistook for a police officer. And after it was published, a former neighbor said that she had remembered a report in a local newspaper that referred to a passing motorist who had seen an unidentified man coming out of the house that day. But this, like all of the lines of inquiry, has seemingly gone nowhere. Sean later said that since his arrest he had seen his daughters for a total of 2 hours, whilst he was in prison in 1998, and had not seen them since, but said he hopes to reunite with them one day. He sought damages following his conviction being quashed for both wrongful arrest and imprisonment. This was denied, and a spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice said, following his acquittal, one person whose testimony had not been heard came forward and gave an interview. Lois Jenkins. Lois said that Sean was a physically abusive liar. "I can recall with clarity the look in his eyes as he told the children, 'Billy's dead.' It had no trace of emotion. I woke up in the middle of the night as he turned over in bed, and it dawned on me, it could have been him. I lay there terrified, thinking it must be him. And if it wasn't him, at least it could have been him." She added that in the days that followed, it was as if Sean wasn't there. He offered no comfort. "I felt let down and also faintly embarrassed. I wondered if our friends had noticed his detachment." Lois said that she had left the UK as a result of her foster daughter's murder, and her faith in the justice system had been tested. She said that her self-confidence had been destroyed and that she felt guilty. When speaking about Billy Joe, she said, "I grew to love her and regard her as my own daughter. She had a good rapport with Sean, and I truly believe that she was happy with her new family." As the 20th anniversary of her death was approaching, her biological mother Deborah said it would be great if they could open the investigation again and get some fresh eyes on it. "The police have nothing to lose and everything to gain. I can't describe it to you, unless you have lost a child. It's a nightmare. I want to get justice for her." But sadly, Deborah would not see justice for Billy Joe, as she would pass away in 2018. When looking at other lines of inquiry, her family called for the police to reopen the case and look at the possibility of her murderer being a man called Anthony Amila, dubbed the M25 rapist. Anthony Amila was given 7 life sentences for a series of brutal sexual assaults around the M25 area. At the time of the murder, he was living in the same area as Billy Joe. Her aunt said that he fit the description of the man who was allegedly stalking her in the months leading up to her death. She said the investigation needs to be reopened for Billy Joe's sake. The police must find out what Amila was doing on the day she was murdered. Somebody murdered Billy Joe, and we've got to find out who it was. The police need to investigate all avenues. Amila could have done it, and the fact is we don't know and need to know. Was he in Hastings that day? He was also reportedly obsessed with girls that were her age and would use improvised weapons in his attacks. Anthony Amila died in prison on the 8th of March 2018. There are no reports of him being named as a suspect in her death, nor of him ever being investigated for it. The murder of Billy Joe Jenkins is one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Britain. Her case has been the subject of much rumor, speculation, and gossip. It's been covered in books, documentaries, and on television shows. But we are still no closer to getting justice for her. Without a doubt, it is an incredibly complex investigation, both scientifically and otherwise. and there are still so many unanswered questions. For those left behind, the pain is still raw all of these years later. For Billy Joe's best friend Holly, losing Billy Joe still haunts her. I was in total shock. I was in counseling for ages. It was such a dreadful thing to happen. She was my best friend. We did everything together. We were inseparable. I wish I could have seen Billy Joe get married and have kids. She's missed out on all that. It's so sad. A memorial for Billy Joe Jenkins was unveiled in Alexandra Park. A wooden bench designed to be a spot for teenagers to spend time together. It was removed in 2024 due to the wood starting to rot. So hopefully it will soon be back in the park. Detective Inspector Kevin Moore said, "We owe it to Billy Joe to keep the case in the public's mind and not give up. Her case will be reviewed every 2 years in the hopes of uncovering something new. She was someone who had everything to live for. She was bright. She was funny. She was articulate. And she was someone who without a doubt would have taken on everything that life had to offer her. But due to the violence inflicted upon her on that sunny Saturday afternoon, she will be forever 13. If you have any information relating to the murder of Billy Joe Jenkins, please contact Sussex Police on 101 and quote, Operation Cathedral." On January 17, 1968, tragedy struck when Ensign Andrew Lee Munns, a 24-year-old newly appointed payroll officer, mysteriously disappeared from the United States ship Cacapan, a refueling ship stationed at Subic Bay in the Philippines during the Vietnam War. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance were perplexing as he seemed to vanish into thin air. To make matters worse, authorities discovered that $8,600 was missing from the ship's safe, leading them to conclude that Munns had taken the money and fled. Despite the case being closed, Munns's family always harbored doubts about this conclusion, firmly believing that it was out of character for him to commit such an act. It wasn't until 3 decades later that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service Cold Case Squad reopened the case, unveiling a series of extraordinary events. As we delve deeper into this intriguing case, 2 crucial questions arise. What pivotal evidence was gathered to identify the perpetrator? And what could have been the motive behind this heinous act? Situated on Luzon's west coast, approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Manila Bay, Subic Bay served as a vital naval base and staging area for the United States during the Vietnam War. The United States ship Cacapan, a refueling ship, played a significant role in supporting United States military operations in the region. Unfortunately, numerous sailors went missing during this tumultuous period, largely due to the hazardous and challenging conditions of naval operations in the conflict. Subic Bay was no exception, and among those who disappeared was Ensign Andrew Lee Munns. Born on October 12, 1943, in Mount Lebanon, Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, Munns had a close-knit family. While details about his parents remain unknown, he had a beloved sister named Mary Lou Taylor and 2 brothers, Skip and Doug. Munns spent most of his early years in the wonderful community of Mount Lebanon, where he was a popular boy throughout his time in the local school system. However, in 10th grade, his family relocated to Upper Mount Clair. Throughout his time in Mount Lebanon, Munns had a tight-knit group of friends who stuck by his side from childhood to adolescence. They witnessed his growth from a carefree kid playing in the dirt behind Lincoln Grade School to a confident and mature high school sophomore. These friends were there for all of Munns' milestones, from his first attempts at sports to learning how to drive and going on his inaugural date. After finishing high school, Munns continued his education at the local senior high school before moving on to Gettysburg College post-graduation. His family's relocation to Upper Mount Clair, New Jersey marked a new chapter in his life. Driven by a strong desire to serve in the military, Munns fulfilled his dream during the tumultuous Vietnam War era after completing college. Opting for a naval career, he assumed the role of payroll officer of the United States ship Cacapan, a refueling ship stationed in Subic Bay, Philippines. Munns's dedication to military service was unwavering, guiding his journey from Pennsylvania to New Jersey and eventually to his position on the United States ship Cacapan. Despite the inherent dangers of his wartime duties, Munns embraced his responsibilities without anticipating the tragic turn of events. On the fateful night of January 17, 1968, the struck when Munns mysteriously vanished from the United States ship Cacapan. Having recently taken on the role of paymaster on the ship, stationed in Subic Bay, Philippines, his sudden disappearance left the crew bewildered and searching for answers. Upon learning of the situation, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service promptly involved Special Agent Raymond McGaddy. Complicating matters further was the discovery of $8,600 missing from the dispersing office safe. Munz was last spotted above deck, heading towards his office around 2 a.m. Authorities suspected Munz due to his position as paymaster with access to the funds. Efforts were made to locate Munz by checking embassies across Southeast Asia, including Hong Kong, Kaohsiung in Taipei, and Manila. However, these attempts proved to be unsuccessful. Consequently, the Navy classified him as a deserter and closed the investigation in 1968. Munz's family received a letter informing them about his disappearance, which left them with a sense of unease when they discovered that $8,600 had also gone missing. The family strongly disagreed with the government's belief that Munz may have stolen the funds, as they believed such behavior was completely out of character for him. According to his family, Munz was a friendly and adventurous young man who would never commit such a serious offense. The Munz family endured 8 years of increasing agony, which was further compounded by the death of Munz's father from a heart attack. In 1976, the family decided to request that Munz be legally declared deceased, leading to a plea for a memorial service and burial at Arlington National Cemetery. However, the Navy denied this request, citing Munz's deserter classification and reserving such honors for those who were honorably discharged. Munz's sister, Mary, refused to accept the idea that her brother would be remembered dishonorably for eternity. She embarked on a quest for the truth, turning to the internet for help by posting a plea on a Vietnam Veterans Bulletin board in the mid-1990s. In response, a former officer named Tim Rosaire agreed with Mary's skepticism about Munz's alleged theft and disappearance. Further investigation by Munz's sister revealed that despite the theft, there was still a significant amount of $51,000 remaining in the Koh Capone ship safe after his disappearance. The fact that Munz had only taken $8,600 raised doubts about the official account, intensifying the family's determination to uncover the truth behind Munz's perplexing vanishing. 30 years after his disappearance in 1998, the case was reopened by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service Cold Case Unit. Interviews with former crew members of the United States ship Koh Capone, where Munz served, revealed that many believed foul play was involved, challenging the initial assumption that Munz had deserted his station. A potential suspect named Michael Edward LeBrun, who served as a petty officer alongside Munz in 1968, emerged during the reinvestigation. LeBrun suggested that Munz had stolen money during the initial inquiry and even speculated that Munz might have gone scuba diving in the middle of the night, which seemed unlikely. Working in the dispersing office with Munz, LeBrun had access to the ship safe. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service interviewed LeBrun 4 times in the fall of 1999. During these sessions, LeBrun cooperated and admitted on November 20, 1999 that he believed he might have been involved in Munz's death and disappearance. He also mentioned repressed memories and requested help in finding a therapist to recover those memories. After minimal contact for about 10 months, LeBrun became the primary suspect by September 2000, leading Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents to re-interview him. On September 21, 2000, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents, Special Agent Carter and Corporal Hughes from the Missouri Highway Patrol unexpectedly visited LeBrun at his workplace. Hughes informed LeBrun that they were conducting an investigation and asked him to accompany them to the Missouri Highway Patrol office for an interview. LeBrun, despite not revealing the subject of the investigation, agreed to participate in the interview, suspecting that it might involve criminal allegations against his employer. He was transported in an unmarked patrol car and was not restrained, with the officers assuring him that he had the freedom to leave or end the interview whenever he wished. Upon arrival at the interview room, which was decorated with enlarged photographs from LeBrun's life, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents Carter and Hughes introduced themselves and began the interview without reciting Miranda warnings. This decision was later deemed deliberate by the district court, as Agent Carter argued that it was not a custodial situation. Despite the absence of Miranda warnings, LeBrun testified during the suppression hearing that he understood his rights and believed he was not in custody and could leave at any time. The government acknowledged the use of psychological tactics during the interview, including labeling LeBrun as the prime suspect in Munz's death and warning about the potential negative impact on his family and finances. It is important to note that the agents did not resort to shouting or physical force at any point. Surprisingly, approximately 33 minutes into the questioning, LeBrun confessed to the crime. He admitted to robbing the safe and attacking Munz when he unexpectedly entered the office. LeBrun confessed to attacking Munz, strangling him and violently smashing his head against the deck. He also provided additional details on how he disposed of Munz's body and the stolen money, stating that he dumped them in a tank of fuel oil to eliminate evidence. After LeBrun's admission of guilt, The agents asked if he wanted to apologize to Mons' sister, Mary Taylor, who had traveled from Milwaukee to assist in the interrogation. LeBrun was willing to offer an apology. Taylor, along with Agent Billington, entered the interview room. LeBrun admitted his responsibility for Mons' death and expressed his regret. Following the interrogation, LeBrun allowed his house to be searched. Despite the admission, LeBrun was not taken into custody that day. He was arrested a few days later and charged with felony murder in March 2001. Subsequently, he appealed his trial, claiming he was not informed of his Miranda rights before confessing to Mons' murder. For the next 4.5 years were continuous attempts to exclude his confession from evidence, with it being rejected and then reinstated multiple times. In September 2005, just before the jury selection for his trial began, LeBrun admitted the truth of his confession and pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with Mons' case. Consequently, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. This series of events marked the end of a lengthy legal process surrounding the confession and signified the resolution of the case, with LeBrun taking accountability for his actions. Following his confession, was honored with full military rights at a memorial service in Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia in June 2001. A ceremonial casket draped with an American flag symbolized the occasion, signifying the end of Mons' deserter status. A memorial headstone was placed at his burial site, commemorating his service and providing closure to the tragic chapter. The news of Mons' murder and subsequent exoneration was met with shock and sorrow by those who knew him. After he moved, most of his friends from Mount Lebanon lost contact with him. One friend recalls reading a headline in the local newspaper in 2002 about a Navy ensign whose name was cleared after a murder. He was filled with a feeling of unease, as though he somehow sensed that it was Mons. Sharing the news with Mons' friends in Mount Lebanon brought about comparable responses, as he was fondly recalled as a kind-hearted individual with a bright future ahead of him. Christina Renee King earned the nickname Cricket from her family due to her petite stature. She was born in 1972 and resided in Kansas City, Kansas. Christina was married to Christopher Wayne Goodall, a professional roofer, and their relationship was filled with love and affection. In 1988, they joyfully welcomed their first child, April, into the world. 3 years later, their family grew with the arrival of their second daughter, Ashley. Unfortunately, Christopher's occupation couldn't adequately support their family, prompting Christina to seek alternative means of providing for them. Sources indicate that she began soliciting clients for financial assistance in an area known as Central Street, offering escort services. Tragically, Christopher found himself incarcerated at some point, leaving Christina feeling hopeless. Despite the societal label she carried, those who knew her believed she was genuinely a good-hearted individual. However, circumstances forced her into a life on the streets, where she faced the harsh realities of a world that often failed to recognize the humanity behind such labels. Christine experienced a brief period of incarceration, but her recent release from prison marked a somber chapter in her life. Unfortunately, the day after her release would be her last. In 1998, April, who was in 5th grade and celebrating her 10th Christmas, received devastating news. On Christmas morning, a group of boys scavenging for scrap metal in the driveway of an abandoned nursing home made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon a partially unclothed body bearing signs of severe beatings and abandonment. The victim had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, with her pants partially pulled down. Nearby, her bra, shoes, and personal belongings were scattered. The victim's face had been brutally disfigured, leaving a gruesome scene. The Kansas City Police Department notified Christina's family, forever altering their lives. The victim was identified as 26-year-old Christina King, and the investigation into her tragic demise and the identity of her assailant began. Barnett, the mother of Christina, consistently followed up with the KCPD in her quest for information. However, unbeknownst to Barnett, the police had actually obtained a lead. A used condom discovered at the crime scene alongside Christina's lifer's body. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of negligence and incompetence on the part of the police, but I will delve into that later. On one occasion, during a phone call, Detective Terry Marst treated Penny Barnett so harshly that she ended up hanging up in tears. When her husband inquired about the reason behind her distress, she revealed that Detective Marst had been insensitive and had used inappropriate language when referring to Christina. The police displayed a clear bias against Christina, as they repeatedly informed the family that she was merely a streetwalker and therefore not a priority. This prejudiced attitude was evident at various points. April, later in life, had the opportunity to view the autopsy photos of her mother and was appalled by the numerous injuries, abrasions and bruises that covered her body. In 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. However, even before this tragedy, their family had already been fractured by Christina's untimely death. For 5 years, Ashley and April had been fending for themselves, with Ashley, at just 14 years old, scouring Quindaro in search of the person responsible for her mother's murder. Quindaro, once a thriving settlement, had become an abandoned ghost town and was considered unsafe during the 90s. Ashley found herself in perilous situations, desperately seeking closure. Eventually, she got into a truck with someone she believed had a connection to her mother's killer. This individual was supposedly a suspect because Christina King's cousin and 2 other women had stolen a significant quantity of his illicit substances. However, this was merely a rumor circulating on the streets. Fortunately, he turned out not to be the person Ashley was seeking, and he did not cause her any harm. 2 decades passed without any further progress in the case. Then in December 2021, the family gathered at the intersection of North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue for a prayer vigil and balloon release. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group committed to promoting transparency in law enforcement. The group extended their support to Christina King's investigation as they aimed to assist the loved ones of those who had been mistreated by the legal system. Khadija Hardway, a member of Justice for Wyandotte, took charge of coordinating the entire event. During her address to the attendees, she emphasized the significance of cases like Christina's, highlighting the urgent need for the Kansas Police Department to establish a cold case unit. Hardway urged the new police chief to allocate existing funds towards the establishment of this unit, as she believed it will enhance transparency in addressing both cold cases and ongoing investigations. This plea sparked a transformative response within the KCPD, ultimately leading to a breakthrough in Christina's case. The newly appointed police chief, Carl Oakman, took Hardway's request seriously and wasted no time in fulfilling it. Immediately after being sworn in on January 1, 2021, he made a solemn commitment to establish a cold case unit within the force. True to his word, a year later, in January 2022, Kansas City's first cold case unit became operational, employing 3 dedicated full-time detectives. This unit would play a crucial role in solving long-standing cold cases. Understanding the origins of Justice for Wyandotte is essential. It all began with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Born in 1953, Pearl Barnes was Khadija Hardway's cousin and a devoted mother to her 2 young children. Pearl, also known as Semima Musawar, was an active member of the Kansas City Islamic community. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, offering her services as a skilled seamstress and running a transportation business that catered to the Chillicothe Correctional Facility. Additionally, she worked as an SRS driver, operated a daycare, sold dinners and bean pies, and actively participated in her family's lives, juggling a diverse range of responsibilities. Given her extensive involvement in the community, a sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed by anyone. Regrettably, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered on November 22, 1996, in an unoccupied residence on Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City. The property had previously belonged to her deceased mother. The autopsy conducted on Pearl revealed a horrifying truth. She had been brutally stabbed more than 40 times, her clothing forcibly removed and scattered nearby. The responsibility of investigating this case fell upon Detective Roger Golubsky of the Kansas Police Department. However, Detective Golubsky faced allegations of misconduct as he had abused his position of authority on multiple occasions. From 1983 to 2008, the Kansas Police Department failed to properly investigate a series of similar cases involving women, most of whom were working women of similar ages. These women often found themselves grappling with homelessness, substance addiction, or engaged in escort services. Their tragic fates were marked by brutal methods such as strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their lifeless bodies were heartlessly abandoned in remote locations or isolated structures. Disturbingly, all of these women were discovered either partially or completely unclothed, with their pants pulled down or shirts pulled off. The victim's clothing was typically found in close proximity. Christina King, too, endured these terrifying circumstances. As time passed and the cases grew cold, it became increasingly evident that something was amiss with Golubsky. Despite his familiarity with most, if not all of the women who had been mercilessly slain, none of the case files indicated his knowledge of these individuals. Furthermore, despite the abundance of potential physical evidence that could have been analyzed, these particular cases received insufficient attention from forensic experts. As a result, evidence collection was often limited and efforts to identify potential perpetrators through DNA or other forensic means were inadequate. The level of incompetence displayed was truly astounding. In fact, in Christina King's case, the Kansas Police Department received a DNA match with a potential suspect, but failed to conduct a follow-up investigation. Khadija Hardway, moved by the prolonged neglect of Golubski's victims, Peas for Justice, found inspiration to collaborate with the community in organizing rallies and demonstrations. The objective was to ensure that the unsolved cases, the faces of the affected women and their stories would not fade into oblivion. Motivated by Pearl's case, she joined forces with like-minded women to establish a nonprofit called Justice for Wyandotte in 2020. The organization worked diligently to combat the department's corrupt individuals. Officers were observed using excessive force, bullying, intimidating, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting individuals, and coercing false testimonies to avoid false accusations and imprisonment. Thanks to Justice for Wyandotte shedding light on the crimes, they exposed the systematic corruption. They brought attention to the case of Lamont McIntyre, who was falsely accused and imprisoned for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. Despite being exonerated in 2017, he never received justice. Golubski remained free. However, there were still many unresolved issues regarding Golubski, particularly in victimizing women. During her involvement with the organization, Hardway arranged a meeting with Carl Oakman, a former candidate for chief of police. In this meeting, she highlighted the evident and unacceptable apathy surrounding unsolved cold cases in the community, stressing the enduring impact on Kansas City families and loved ones. She strongly advocated for the establishment of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. Following the meeting with Oakman, Justice for Wyandotte initiated an awareness campaign and petitioned for the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit, aiming to address the numerous unsolved cases that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965. In 2003, police received a DNA match from the condom found near Christina's body, identifying Gary Davis as the suspect. Surprisingly, he was not immediately questioned despite being closely monitored by Wyandotte County Community Corrections. Gary Davis, a 52-year-old Kansas City resident, was a truck driver in his early 20s at the time of the alleged incidents involving Christina and Pearl. Due to the nature of his job, it was understandable why he had managed to evade suspicion back then, as he often traveled far from the crime scenes. Although the police were aware of his whereabouts, it took 20 years to finally arrest Davis. The investigation was slow, with a 14-month delay in questioning the suspect, followed by years of silence. After a public appeal for Justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to process the DNA, form a team, and apprehend the perpetrator. In 2022, the cold case unit connected the dots, confirming that the DNA from both crime scenes matched Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Police also discovered a Facebook page that matched Davis's name and description, containing controversial posts about truck driving and societal double standards. When attempting to contact him, officers found only one operational phone number out of 3 listed with a full voicemail inbox. Finally, in September 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with the murder of Christina King, with bail set $500,000. Importantly, there was no statute of limitations, ensuring that justice could be served regardless of the time that had passed. If convicted, Davis could face life imprisonment. In a surprising turn of events, Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree and Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oakman jointly conducted a press conference to commend their investigative efforts. Dupree highlighted the relentless work of the detectives, while Oakman underscored the importance of a thorough investigation over the significance of the DNA hit. They both emphasized the meticulous analysis required to ensure the correct suspect was apprehended. Meanwhile, in March 2022, Attorney Cheryl Pellet, representing Kansas City, shed light on the corrupt environment within the Kansas Police Department. She issued a statement aiming to indict not only disgraced Detective Roger Golubski, but the entire culture that enabled his misconduct. Golubski, responsible for an unjust arrest, faced federal charges including kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Presently, the Kansas Police Department is collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to determine if Davis could be linked to additional homicides in the region, or potentially thousands of miles away due to his occupation as a long-haul driver. Davis is currently a suspect or person of interest in at least 8 other cases. The establishment of the Cold Case Unit through Justice for Wyandotte led to the resolution of 11 more cases. It is evident that the Kansas Police Department bears responsibility for the delayed arrest, which could have been made years earlier. The department owes the families of the victims an apology and a thorough explanation. The distressed loved ones, particularly Christina's daughters, who sought closure for years, were all victims of the department's incompetence. Decades may pass and many cases may grow cold, but occasionally some are brought back into the light. Today's story is no exception. It is a tale of unexpected resolution after nearly 25 years of stagnation. This particular case revolves around Mandy Steingasser, a vibrant and sociable individual who cherished her outdoor adventures with her father. Together, they embarked on camping trips and road journeys, as Mandy fearlessly embraced her adventurous spirit. On one occasion, she even encountered a ground squirrel, cradling it in her arms with affection. Unfortunately, the squirrel bit her. But such encounters were not uncommon for Mandy, who possessed a penchant for interacting with various creatures during her camping escapades. Her personality was enigmatic, and she often associated with individuals who carried an air of danger. When questioned about her choice of friends, she simply stated that she did not pass judgment on them. In the autumn of 1993, Mandy, a 17-year-old senior at North Tonawanda High School near Buffalo, New York, found herself at a crossroads. Although academically gifted, she had yet to solidify her career plans and subsequently enrolled at Niagara County Community College after graduation. Mandy exuded boundless energy and reveled in the thrill of parties and experimenting with alcohol. At times, her enthusiasm for such activities caused her to lose track of time, occasionally forgetting to return home. To ensure her safety, her parents established a set of rules for her evening outings. She was expected to adhere to a specific curfew and, if unable to do so, she was required to inform her parents or make her way home as swiftly as possible. On the 18th of September 1993, a Saturday night, Mandy ventured out with her friends, Stacy, her boyfriend Brian, and Brian's acquaintance, Wayne. Stacy and Mandy had arranged a sleepover at the Steingassers' residence, with the understanding that they would return home by midnight. Both Mandy and Stacy were 17, while Brian and Wayne were a few years older. Wayne possessed his own apartment, making it convenient for them to procure alcohol. That evening, the group decided to visit a liquor store to purchase whiskey and rum, before embarking on a journey from North Tonawanda to Buffalo in Wayne's car. Their intention was to attend a rock concert at a local bar, but unfortunately, the girls were denied entry due to their age by the bouncer. Brian and Wayne, being considerate, chose to stay with them as both girls were somewhat intoxicated. It was quite out of character for Mandy not to inform her parents about her whereabouts, especially since she had a curfew. After a short while, a car filled with men approached the group, accusing Brian and Wayne of harassing one of their neighbors. This led to a brief altercation which frightened both Mandy and Stacy, causing them to flee in different directions. Shortly after, the sound of police sirens could be heard, prompting the men to hastily depart. Brian and Wayne desperately called out to the girls to return, but Mandy had vanished. She had fled out of fear that if the police found her, they would escort her back home, thus ruining her plan to sneak in without her parents' knowledge of her missed curfew. Mandy began her journey on foot towards her house, which was over a mile away. She headed north on Oliver Street until she reached a convenience store at the intersection of 5th Avenue. It was there that a car pulled up beside her, and she leaned into the passenger seat before entering the vehicle. The driver was an acquaintance from her school who kindly offered to drive her home between 1:10 and 1:30 a.m. on September 19th. Regrettably, this marked the last time Mandy was seen alive. At 2:30 a.m., Stacy called Mandy's mother Lorraine, inquiring whether Mandy had returned home. Lorraine became furious upon realizing that her daughter had not only missed curfew, but also failed to come home. Throughout the night, her parents anxiously awaited Mandy's arrival. She never appeared. The following morning, they began reaching out to all of her friends. Fortunately, Mandy had a friend whose father was a police officer, and he promptly visited the Steingassers' residence. The commencement of the investigation unfolded, and the authorities proclaimed that she may have absconded, although Mandy's parents vehemently dismissed this notion as they possessed an intimate understanding of their daughter's character. Whispers began to circulate, insinuating that she had ventured southward to Florida alongside her lover, who had recently relocated there. However, on the 25th day of October in the year 1993, a fortnight following Mandy's inexplicable disappearance, two individuals engaged in a mushroom hunt stumbled upon a ghastly sight within the confines of Bond Lake Park. There, nestled upon the banks of Myers Lake, lay a set of severely decomposed human remains. It appeared as though an attempt had been made to submerge the lifeless body into the depths of the lake, only to be thwarted by the entanglement of foliage. Subsequent investigations confirmed the identity of the remains as belonging to Mandy. The forensic examination divulged a harrowing truth. She had met her demise through strangulation, her bra serving as the instrument of her demise. Furthermore, the report revealed the presence of 2 brain hemorrhages and a fracture near her frontal temple. The authorities' suspicions turned towards a fellow student from Mandy's school, the last person seen with her. Although the police publicly acknowledged the existence of a suspect, they refrained from disclosing his identity due to the dearth of evidence that would substantiate his culpability. Mandy Steingasser, a tender 17 years of age, was last sighted on the 19th day of September in the year 1993, approximately 1:30 in the morning, at the intersection of 5th Avenue and Oliver Street within the city of North Tonawanda. Her lifeless body was discovered on the 25th day of October in the same year, within the confines of Bond Lake Park. The absence of substantial evidence caused this case to languish in obscurity for a quarter of a century, until the advent of new technological advancements that facilitated the examination of the culprit's DNA, which was found upon Mandy's remains. Finally, when the truth was unveiled, a plethora of evidence was amassed, paving the way for the district attorney to present a compelling case before the grand jury. On the 24th day of April in the year 2018, Joseph Bellstadt was apprehended at his abode, mere moments after returning from his place of employment. It was his 43rd birthday and he found himself facing a second-degree murder charge. Bellstadt maintained that on September 19, 1993, he had indeed given Mandy a ride, but he insisted that he dropped her off in front of a church before stopping at a donut shop and returning home. However, witnesses contradicted his statement, claiming they saw Bellstadt picking up Mandy and then coming back. Furthermore, his friends revealed that he had asked them to provide false testimony in his favor. Despite Bellstadt's denial of these allegations, he was compelled to undergo a lie detector test. During the first attempt, he stormed out of the room due to the questioning's tone, but during the second test, his lies were exposed, confirming him as a liar. Another witness stepped forward, stating that Bellstadt had taken her to a secluded location weeks before Mandy's murder, shedding light on his possible motives. When investigators searched Bellstadt's car, they discovered 2 strands of pubic hair in the back seat, which they were unable to test in 1993. However, with the advancements in technology by 2018, the hair was confirmed to belong to Mandy. It was then established that Bellstadt had attempted to sexually assault her before becoming enraged and strangling her to death with her own bra. Finally, on March 9, 2020, his trial commenced and the defense argued that he was being unjustly convicted without substantial evidence. Nevertheless, the jury presented numerous witnesses who testified about Bellstadt's behavior following Mandy's disappearance. They revealed that he had stopped attending school, to which Bellstadt claimed he had planned a trip to Canada that was ultimately cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. However, all of these statements were proven to be lies, leading to his conviction for the murder of Mandy Steingasser. On January 14th, he received a 25-year prison sentence, despite his desperate attempts to maintain his innocence. "But I am not the person who killed Mandy. I am innocent," he maintained. Stacy Pinnell was born on September 5, 1967, in the small American town of Ripley, Mississippi. She had a younger brother and sister with whom she spent a lot of time and got along well with. Stacy was an energetic person with many friends. In school, she enjoyed participating in extracurricular activities. She joined the marching band, where she played a decorative wooden rifle. After graduating from high school in 1985, she attended Northeast Mississippi Community College in Boonville. Although it was about a 30-minute drive from her home, she decided to live in the dormitory. From the first days of college, Stacy was thrilled, made many friends, and joined the local marching band. On October 7, 1985, Stacy attended a training session after school, met up with her boyfriend, and went to a party on campus. At 12:30 a.m., she returned to the dormitory with her friends. They chatted for a bit, and then she went to sleep. At around 2:30 a.m., her roommate, Amy Wheeler, returned to the dormitory after the party but had lost her keys and had to knock on the door. The room was designed for 2 people, so only Stacy could open the door. However, there was no response to the knocking. Amy waited there for a few minutes before deciding to knock on the adjacent room's door. The dormitory was designed such that there was a common bathroom between the two rooms, so Amy could go through the bathroom of the adjacent room. A student named Stephanie Alexander lived in that room, who woke up to the knocking and opened the door. Both girls were surprised that Stacy did not respond to the knocking, so they entered her room together. The room was completely dark, and the only light came from a very dim lamp. Amy entered the room and saw Stacy lying on her bed, but one of her legs was hanging down, and she felt that something was not right with her friend. Getting closer, she was horrified to see blood on the bed. After recovering from the shock, she ran out of the room to get help. Other students responded to her screams, and the dormitory guard called 911. The police arrived and found an alarming scene. Stacy was dead, and there were traces of blood all over the room. There was a pillow over her face, and her underwear was pulled down. The investigators also noticed that someone had cut the mosquito netting of the window. Next to the bed, they found a wooden rifle that Stacy had used in parades with the marching band. It was covered in blood and wrapped in a towel. The police assumed the rifle had been used in the murder. Upon examining the crime scene more closely, forensic experts found a short hair on the victim's bed. All this was enough to form a preliminary picture of what had happened. Someone had made a hole in the window of Stacy's room, climbed in, raped, and murdered her. However, this version of events quickly revealed some inconsistencies. The size of the hole in the mosquito netting was too small for an adult to pass through. The window in question was situated at a certain height from the ground, which would have made the perpetrator's task more difficult. The police did not find the cut piece of the mosquito netting either. Furthermore, forensic experts examined the victim's body and found no traces of male biological material, casting doubt on the theory that the victim had been raped. At the same time, the pathologist confirmed that the wooden rifle, with a high degree of probability, was the murder weapon, as the injury characteristics indicated that the victim had been struck multiple times with it. Experts also did not find any defensive wounds on her body, suggesting that the victim did not resist the attacker. All possible evidence from Stacy's room was collected by crime scene investigators, but none of it furthered the investigation. At the time, DNA analysis was not commonly used, so the investigators could not examine the blood samples or other potential biological traces. Additionally, no fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, as the perpetrator had apparently wiped it clean with the towel. Despite the lack of leads, detectives still hoped that experts might find something in the room, so they decided to take fingerprints from all individuals who theoretically could have entered the women's dormitory. This task proved to be very difficult as the police had to speak with hundreds of male university students and ask them to volunteer their fingerprints. They also took prints from all male staff members. The problem was that only girls lived in this residence, and a special key was needed to enter the building. Men could only enter in a few instances, such as being let in by residents or being college employees with a key. Nevertheless, the female residents frequently invited their boyfriends and male friends, which meant that the officers had to spend a lot of time collecting their fingerprints. However, in the end, this led to no results, since no matching prints were found at the crime scene. With no leads, the investigators turned to a psychologist and asked for a psychological profile of the killer. After reviewing all the available information, the specialist posited that the attacker was likely a man between 20 and 24 years old with a strong physical build and no criminal record. The psychologist believed that the crime was not premeditated. The killer saw an opportunity and decided to attack the victim. This description made the officers further doubt that the criminal had entered the room through the window, as the hole in the mosquito netting was too small for a large, adult man to pass through. Meanwhile, panic spread among the college students. The female students were afraid to be in their residences, fearing they could become the next victim of the unknown assailant. The fact that the police could not find any clues only heightened the overall anxiety. The officers continued to search for possible suspects and decided to investigate Stacy's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne. They searched his room in the residence and found nothing to suggest his involvement. Investigators found it impossible to establish whether Stacy Pinnell's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne, had any motive for her murder. According to Stacy's friends, the couple rarely argued and had no significant issues. However, the investigators learned from Stacy's parents that before starting college, she had another boyfriend named Ben with whom she had broken up just a few months earlier. Ben and Stacy had been in a long-term relationship during school, and he had even given her a ring, hoping to marry her in the future. But Stacy ended the relationship. Despite Ben's reluctance to accept the breakup and his refusal to take the ring back, Stacy did not change her decision. Up until Stacy left for college, Ben repeatedly tried to meet with her, but she remained firm in her decision. The detective spoke with Ben, who claimed that on the night of the murder, he was asleep at home. His mother corroborated his alibi, stating that he went to bed around 11 p.m. and was home the next morning. However, the investigators considered the possibility that Ben could have left the house undetected, gone to Stacy's college, committed the murder, and then returned home. Ben agreed to undergo a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. The operator could not determine if he was telling the truth. A second interrogation yielded the same results. This made the detective suspicious, but without concrete evidence, they could not link him to the crime. Experts attempted to determine if the hair found on Stacy's bed belonged to Ben, but they were unable to reach a definitive conclusion. Since DNA analysis was not commonly used at that time to confirm or refute such evidence, it was not possible to do so. Due to the uncertain polygraph results, Ben became the prime suspect in the case, but Stacy's relatives did not believe he was capable of harming her. They described him as kind and well-mannered, always taking care of her. However, without evidence, the police could not charge him, and the search for clues continued. Later on, the investigators re-examined the case materials and noticed something peculiar. When examining the cut in the mosquito netting, they observed that the fibers were directed towards the outside rather than inside, indicating that the piece had been cut from within Stacy's room, not from outside. This discovery further puzzled the detectives. If the killer did not enter through the window, he must have had a key or entered with one of the residents. However, the police doubted this was possible since there was a guard in the dormitory who sat near the entrance and watched everyone who came in and out. For several months, there were no significant developments in the case. Then, the lead detective decided to seek assistance from Steve Rhodes, the sheriff of Illinois, who was well known in law enforcement circles for his unique approach to interrogations based on neurolinguistic programming. He frequently spoke at police seminars and had a reputation for being able to extract information from almost any suspect and detect lies. Steve agreed to interrogate 4 people involved in the case: Stacy's neighbors, Amy and Stephanie, as well as Ben and Tommy. In September 1986, he began his work, starting with Amy. She recounted everything she knew, and the officer found no reason to doubt her words. He then spoke with Stephanie, who said that on the night in question, she took an anti-inflammatory medication prescribed by a doctor and went to sleep. At around 12:30 a.m., Stephanie heard Stacy and her friends returning to the dormitory and talking loudly in Stacy's room. Stephanie went to ask them to speak more quietly. After her request, Stacy's friends left for their rooms and Stephanie went to bed. However, Steve Rhodes, an experienced investigator, sensed that Stephanie was withholding important details. He accused her of lying and urged her to tell the truth. Despite Stephanie's insistence that she was not deceiving him, Rhodes continued to press her with questions until she finally revealed that she had returned to Stacy's room after the friends had left. This was a shocking development for the detectives nearly a year after the murder. After a long pause during the questioning, Stephanie, to everyone's surprise, confessed that she had killed Stacy. According to Stephanie, she had entered Stacy's room for a chat. At some point, the conversation turned to Tommy Osborne, Stacy's boyfriend. Stephanie complimented Tommy, which upset Stacy. When Stacy demanded that Stephanie stay away from Tommy, the conversation escalated. After an exchange of words, Stacy slapped Stephanie, who retaliated in kind. The altercation became physical, and at some point, Stephanie grabbed a wooden rifle next to the bed and struck Stacy, causing her to fall onto the bed. Stephanie then hit Stacy several times more until she stopped moving. Realizing what she had done after seeing the blood, Stephanie panicked and decided to dispose of the evidence. She locked the bedroom door, washed the blood off her hands, and then staged the scene to make it look as if someone had broken into the room, raped, and killed Stacy. She placed a pillow over Stacy's head, pulled down her underwear, and then cut a hole in the mosquito netting, hiding the cut piece in Stacy's closet under a pile of clothes. She cleaned the wooden rifle with a towel and took a shower to remove any traces of blood. Stephanie then decided to get rid of her t-shirt and the piece of mosquito netting she had cut. She locked herself in the bathroom and burned them, then masked the smell of smoke by spraying a large amount of perfume. After covering her tracks, Stephanie went to bed and was only awakened when Amy knocked on her door. The detectives were astonished by this confession. For a whole year, it had never occurred to them that the killer could be a woman, let alone Stacy's dormitory neighbor. Stephanie was arrested and charged with Stacy's murder. 3 days later, She wrote a letter to her boyfriend, whom she had been dating for a week at the university, detailing the events and claiming it was an accident. She wrote that on the day of the murder, she had taken some energy pills and was not thinking clearly. She didn't even remember the moment of the murder, but had seen it in nightmares throughout the year. Days after sending the letter, the case took another unexpected turn. Stephanie claimed that Steve Rhodes had put her in some sort of trance using his techniques and had implanted the confession in her mind. She insisted she couldn't have killed Stacy and accused the police of taking advantage of her vulnerable state to close the case. According to her, the energy pills clouded her mind, allowing Steve Rhodes to convince her over time that she had indeed killed her neighbor. In 1987, a judge held 3-day hearings to determine the truth of her statements. The detectives asserted that Stephanie had not been subjected to any undue pressure and that no one had hypnotized her. They argued that in her confession, she mentioned details only the murderer could know, such as where she hid the knife used to cut the mosquito netting. The detectives hadn't found it during their initial investigation, but after Stephanie's confession, they found the knife in the closet under a pile of clothes. However, there were nuances. Firstly, the girls were neighbors and often entered each other's rooms, so Stephanie might have known about the knife's location under different circumstances. Secondly, no evidence could confirm or refute that the net had been cut with that specific knife. Nonetheless, the judge concluded that Stephanie's initial testimony was not obtained through hypnosis or any other form of manipulation. The trial began in 1988. Stephanie's lawyers continued to argue that her confession was coerced and highlighted the lack of evidence against their client. They emphasized that the lie detection tactics used by Steve Rhodes were not scientifically founded and could not be used in court according to the law. Rhodes claimed that one could tell if someone was lying by observing their eye movements. Furthermore, Stephanie's lawyers presented medical examination results indicating that her cognitive abilities could have been impaired due to the energy pills, making her more susceptible to manipulation like hypnosis. The prosecution argued that Stephanie knew details unknown to investigators at the time of the interrogation, making her testimony credible. They also conducted a court experiment with a psychological sciences doctor attempting to hypnotize her, concluding that it was not possible to induce such a state in her. The victim's relatives also shared interesting information, stating that Steve Rhodes had mentioned Stephanie several times, considering her a problematic person and, to some extent, fearing her. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury eventually found Stephanie guilty of involuntary manslaughter, sentencing her to 20 years in prison, of which she served 9 before being released on parole. Once freed, Stephanie continued to maintain her innocence and hired lawyers to revisit the case. During their review, the lawyers noticed similarities with another murder committed in 1993. At that time, a man named Charles Crawford attacked a girl who lived 40 minutes away by car from the college Stacy Pinnell attended. There were some notable similarities between these two cases. Firstly, the other victim also attended Northeast Mississippi Community College in Boonville. Secondly, the perpetrator entered her home by cutting a hole in the mosquito netting. Stephanie and her lawyers believe that Charles Crawford could be behind Stacy's murder. Crawford was arrested in 1993 and subsequently sentenced to death. The challenge lies in the lack of evidence to prove his guilt in Stacy's case. However, there were significant developments. Stephanie's lawyers discovered that on the wooden rifle found at the crime scene, there was a drop of blood that did not belong to Stacy. DNA analysis of this evidence had not been carried out at the time, as a case review was necessary to proceed with it. Additionally, the victim's underwear was sent to an independent expert, and they were able to extract a DNA sample from an unknown male. This sample has not been added to the FBI's database for comparison with Crawford's DNA, because a case review is required for that as well. Moreover, there is no guarantee that the sample found is related to the murder. Supporting the possibility of Crawford's involvement, the lawyers pointed out other facts. Crawford lived near the college at that time, and allegedly 2 witnesses saw him near the campus a few days before the murder. However, there is no reliable confirmation of this sighting. Despite similarities between the 2 crimes, there are discrepancies. The cut in the mosquito netting was made from inside the room to the outside, which discounts the possibility of an intruder entering from the street. Additionally, Crawford's height was 6 feet and 1 inch, making it unlikely that he could fit through such a small opening. Another contentious point is that the murderer used Stacy's wooden rifle as a weapon. If Crawford had really decided to enter the victim's room and kill her, it is hard to imagine that he would not have brought a weapon with him. Currently, Stephanie and her lawyers are still trying to obtain a case review that would allow comparison of the evidence with Crawford's DNA. Crawford remains on death row, having even spoken with detectives about Stacy's case. But the police could not determine if he was near the college on the night of the murder.